Bienvenidos, Hushamadid, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the CTS-130 Section 402 course from the spring 2021 semester. This is the Cisco Networking Academy Introduction to Networks version 7 curriculum, and in this packet tracer tutorial, we're going to be taking a deeper dive look at packet tracer 2.5.5. where we're going to be configuring initial switch settings. And so in this video, you're going to learn the basics behind configuring a switch that maybe you have just taken out of the box, turned on, and would like to configure to use in your network. So let's take a look at the activity as it stands here. Excuse me, you can see we have switch number 1 and switch number 2, and then PC1 and PC2, and we have a link between the two switches, and I'll touch on this link here as the activity progresses. But let me start out by saying that this may or may not be what is referred to as a trunk link. This is just simply a link connecting these two switches together and extending the broadcast domain, the VLAN, or you can think of it as a subnet for VLAN 1. So keep that in mind as we go to work through this activity. And so we're going to look at some basic configuration settings, and let's start out first here by logging on to switch 1. Now remember, we are connected when we click on the switch. It will treat us as if we're connected to the console. And the console port is a special port typically on the rear of the switch. Some models will have it on the front, and maybe it's a small USB-C port on the front. But typically, it's where you would plug in an RJ45 connector cable, a rollover cable, some people might refer to it as, into the rear of the switch, and that cable might be connected to your PC. In fact, in Packet Tracer, if I was to click on the lightning bolt here, we've got connect links as locked. So you could typically in Packet Tracer click on this lightning bolt, and you might be able, or you could be able to select a console port to make a console port connection from the PC. Here, the PCs are connected with Ethernet cables into Ethernet ports on the front of switch 1 and switch 2. And so PC1 and PC2, in order to connect remotely to switch 1 and switch 2, would need to use either Telnet or SSH, the Secure Shell Protocol. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're being asked to do. Remember, the greater than sign indicates that you are in user exec mode. And in user exec mode, you have access to some commands, but not a lot of commands that you would typically want to run, specifically commands where you can configure the switch. And so to configure the switch, it is genuinely, or most of the time, going to be a two-step process. You're going to use the enable command, or you can just simply say en, and this is going to move you from user exec mode into privilege exec. And privilege exec, if you're familiar with Linux, is similar to being the root user. You're all powerful on the switch right now, meaning you can change into global configuration mode where you can change settings on the switch. So from user exec with the greater than sign, there's not a lot that we can change. In fact, very little to nothing of significance can be changed from user exec. However, from privilege exec, indicated by the pound or the hash sign as it's commonly referred to, once I'm in privilege exec mode, I can do anything that I want to this switch. And so that's why we want to protect that privilege exec mode. So the prompt changed. We're in privilege exec, and now we'll move to step 2. We want to examine the configuration, and they have us type show running config. So in order to shorten that, you can say show, or I should say, in order to run the command, you could type in show running config, or to shorten that command, you can simply say show run. Now, the reason that they want you to see the whole command is because when you're tested and when you sit for the CCNA, chances are they're going to be providing you with responses to questions that would show the complete command syntax and not the abbreviation. But it's a good thing to know the abbreviation. That way, you can shorten the amount of commands or shorten the size of the command that you're entering in to the switch. And so as you can see, this is going to show me my current configuration. And you can see that it's 1080 bytes. We see the software version of the switch. We see that the switch has the generic Cisco Switch Pass name defined. And we've got some timestamps, right? So if we have a log that we're keeping track of events on the switch, or if we're doing debugs. And debug is short for debugging, where we might want to take a look at more granular information about the switch. We could run debug commands. And then you have the service password encryption. And this is going to provide us with basic password encryption that is not very secure, but it's good for people looking over your shoulder. All right, so let's move down here, and you can see that the switch has a number of ports. And then we get down to the very bottom where we can see the console port, which I referred to earlier. Line con 0 is how you refer to the console port. And then we have these VTY, which stands for virtual terminal lines. And these, think of them as virtual ports. And every time someone telnets into the switch or SSHs into the switch, one of these ports is going to be used up. And so here we can see that we have a total of 16 ports available on which users from PC1 and PC2 and any other PCs that may be plugged in that can get to the switch will be able to access the switch. And so we'd have a maximum of 16 users. All right, so we've got some questions here. How many fast Ethernet interfaces does the switch have? Well, we saw from fast Ethernet 01 to fast Ethernet 024, so the answer is 24. How many gigabit Ethernet interfaces does the switch have? Well, it has these two right down here on the bottom. Now, if you were to be looking at the front of a switch, you would typically see these two ports, the gigabit Ethernet ports, on the far right-hand side of the switch. And on the left-hand side, leading to the right-hand side, you would see the 24 fast Ethernet ports. What is the range of values for the VTY lines? Well, we've seen that at 0 to 15. Which command displays the current contents of non-volatile random access memory, or NVRAM? Well, remember, there's a command called dir, right? And that is actually the command. And this will show you different directories that exist on the switch. And non-volatile random access memory is space that even if the switch is rebooted, it's not volatile, meaning that the things that you have there, as opposed to just memory space, where if you reload the switch, things in memory would be lost, non-volatile random access memory would keep what we have here. So if I say dir NVRAM : you can see that we don't have anything in NVRAM, but we've got this other directory, flash. Now, flash typically, and I say typically loosely here, might be an external flash card that you've inserted or that is inside the device. And it's here where typically we have a little bit more memory, excuse me, or a little bit more space available to us, because it's in flash that we keep the actual Cisco IOS file required for the switch to boot. And so that's typically maintained in flash. Now, a quick step back. When we talked about the number of ports, you can say show running config and then hit the space bar and come all the way to the bottom and then scroll back up and try to figure out the number of ports you have. You can also say show IP interface brief. And you'll notice here that this gives us a very nice consolidated output of the ports. In fact, it gives us some additional information. It shows us the status of the port. In other words, layer 1 is your status, is something plugged in here. And then layer 2 is the protocol, meaning, do I have connectivity to whatever is plugged in? Do I see it? So this would be status is your layer 1 status, and protocol is your layer 2 status. So layer 1 being the physical layer in the OSI model, layer 2 being your data link layer. And so you can see here that all of these ports are down. Now, they're not administratively shut down. This is just showing that nothing is currently plugged in when it says down. If they were administratively down, it would actually state that. In fact, you can see here at the very bottom for VLAN 1, it is administratively down. And we'll come back and talk about what that actually is. This is not a physical port on the switch. The VLAN is a virtual local area network. And by default, when you take a Cisco switch out of the box, all of the ports on that switch are in the default VLAN, which is VLAN 1. And so start thinking about a VLAN as a subnet, like 192.168.1.0/24. So a VLAN is a subnet, is a broadcast domain. So those terms we're going to find throughout this course are synonymous with each other. And this port that's listed down here is what's referred to as a switch virtual interface on which we can assign an IP address. But we'll come back to that later. Just know that that's what that is, and that's why it shows up in this output here. So another convenient way to see the number and type and kind of ports that are on the switch. So we looked at NVRAM. Why does the switch respond with startup config not present? Well, let's go ahead and say that. What if I say show NVRAM, which is another way, not show NVRAM. If I say dir NVRAM and then colon, you can see it shows that there's no files in this directory. Well, if I do a question mark here, you can see that we have other commands from which we can pick. Clear, clock, configure, connect, copy, debug, and there's the dir command. So list files on the file system, and then we have some other commands here. You even have the more command, that if you wanted to take a look at the contents of a file that might be on the switch, again, it would need to be text. We're not going to be able to look at the bin file, which is the iOS, because that is compressed or compiled. Right? We're not going to be able to see the contents of that. And so then we have the show command, which we've already seen, and the question mark gives us that context-sensitive help. And so this becomes a very, very good command, that question mark, because it'll show us the commands that are available. So why does the switch respond with startup config is not present? And that's because we haven't saved or copied the running configuration to the startup configuration. And so we haven't made any changes. Nothing's need to be saved. And so now we're going to start making some changes that we're going to save, and we're going to see that the contents of NVRAM are going to change. So let's go ahead and go from privilege exec. Remember, I referred to this and made an analogy that this is like the root access on a Linux box, where once I'm in privilege exec, I can do anything I want here. So the command is configure terminal, and that's one way to enter the command. The other way that you'll see commonly is simply conf t, meaning configure terminal. So again, another abbreviation. Become familiar and comfortable with both. So configure terminal puts us into what's referred to as global configuration mode. So we've seen 3 different modes so far. We had user exec mode, which is the mode we enter into when we first connect to the switch. We have privilege exec mode, which is the mode we enter into after we type in enable at the user exec prompt. And once we're in privilege exec, i.e. that root supreme being access, we can type in any, or I should say we could type in any command, but configure terminal is going to put us into global configuration mode. And from here, we can now change certain settings about the switch. So the first one I want to change is the host name, because you can see we have the default host name of switch. So I type in host name S1, and as you can see, the prompt even changed, and now the host name of the switch is switch 1. Now they would like us to type exit here. There's one additional command that I'm going to ask you to enter in right now that doesn't show here. Again, this is sort of the value add of the tutorial video. There might be times when you type in something and you think that it's a command and you hit enter, and you might get a response like that. If I was to exit out here, exit out here and go back to privilege exec, and I type in something that I thought might be a command, and I get this translating message. And you can see it's translating to some domain server, because by default, Cisco switches, if you type something in that's not a command, Cisco treats it as if it's a host name. And it's going to try to resolve that host name using DNS. But we don't have any DNS configured, and if you're like me, chances are you're probably going to have a few typos along the way. So the command that I'm about to show you is going to disable the switch, and to get out of this, you would hold Control, Shift, and the number 6 would get you out of that. And you can see the name lookup aborted, because you might sit for 30 or 60 seconds waiting for this message to go away. Now, Control Shift 6 gets rid of that here in Packet Tracer, and in general works on Cisco switches. However, in order to disable the switch from treating a typo of a command, right? Remember, if the switch doesn't know what the command is because you have a typo in it, it's going to try to translate that name using DNS, and we don't want that to happen. So let's go back into global config, and let's type in no IP domain lookup. And again, I'm abbreviating the command there, but that command will disable what we just saw. So now if I typed in KDJF and hit enter, it now simply comes up and says unknown command or computer name, or unable to find the computer address. Because remember, prior to that, it thought that that was a computer name and then tried to find the address. We turn that off, and we want that off right now because, again, we're exploring the switch. We're new to the configuration, and we want to make sure that if there's any mistakes in terms of commands, that we don't have to sit or type Control-Shift-6, that it simply gives us this message instead. So let's come down to step number 2. We're going to secure access to the device. Again, remember, in Packet Tracer, when we click on the device, it's as if we're connected to the console port. There really is no physical connection here that we see, right? You could have a physical connection. Again, that's locked in this activity from me making a new connection. But when you click on the device, it'll treat it as if you're connected to the console line. So let's secure that. So let's go into global config again with configure terminal, or conf t, and let's type in line con 0 or line console 0. And we're going to place a locally significant password on the console line. And that password is simply let me in all lowercase. Now, if I say do, show, run, right? The do command, and this is something that learners will get frustrated with early on. The do command is not something you're shown early on. And so if you wanted to say show run, you're going to get an error message here because we're in the global configuration console line sub-configuration mode here. In order for show run to work, I would need to be back at privilege exec mode. And so what learners spend and waste a lot of time doing is they enter a command or they go into a subconfiguration command like the line console subconfiguration area. They enter in that password, let me in, and maybe the login. And the reason I'm getting ready to run this command is let's see, because it looked like login was already on there. But they want to type and see what the configuration looks like, or they want to say show IP interface brief to see what the interfaces are on the device. And you're going to get an error message. And so again, the value add of these tutorials is going to be talking about things that will save you some time, that will make you more effective and efficient as a network administrator and as a learner in the Cisco space. And that command is do. In fact, if I was to hit the question mark, you'll notice nowhere in here does it show that command. So this is one of those undocumented features of Cisco. If you type in do, it basically will treat what follows as if you are in the privilege exec mode. And so if I say do show run, and you can type it out or abbreviate it, it will then run that command. And you can see here on the console line, we didn't have login defined. We have it on the VTY lines, but not on the console line. And so a quick look of that tells me, yeah, I need to type in login as well. Now I can say do show run again and come down here to the bottom and take a look at my config and see that, okay, great, that's in there. So now it wants me to type exit to get back to, exit to get back to global config mode, and then exit again to get to privilege exec mode. And as you can see, when you're configuring things, if you're wanting to look at your running config and you're in a sub-configuration mode or global configuration mode, you would have to exit out if you didn't know about that do command. All right. So why is the login command required? And the login command is required because it instructs the console line to prompt the user for that password when trying to connect to the switch via the console line. So let's log out. Let me hit enter, and you can see it's now prompting me for the password to get logged in. And the reason it says login is it's specific to the console line. We'll see there's other variations of that login option under the console line and the VTY lines that we could use later. But it's simply saying login using the password that we defined on that console line, which is let me in. And here I am in user exec mode. So what if I wanted to say show run? Can't do that because I'm in user exec. Because if I can say show run, I can see the entire configuration. And so I want to get into privilege exec with the enable command and then say show run. And here you can see that we look at our console line configuration that has a basic password configured. And notice the password is in plain text. It's in clear text. Right? So anybody looking over your shoulder could see what the value of the password is for the console line. And they can also see that this login command is telling the console line, force anyone trying to connect to the console line to log in, hence the password prompt, and that is the valid password value that we will accept. And so we're all the way down here now to step number 4. Now, we're going to secure privilege mode access. In other words, you'll notice that when I'm in, let's put that let me in password back in. When I'm in user exec mode, and I'm going to teach you another little trick here. When I'm in user exec mode and I go to get into that supreme being, all powerful privilege exec mode with the enable command, am I getting prompted for a password? I am not. It's automatically, or automatically if you will, putting me into that super user root, all powerful status, but I don't even have to enter a password. So we've protected the console line, and that's a good start. But if someone was looking over my shoulder, they would see what the password is if I was to show the running config. So they may come back later after I've disconnected from the console port and try to log in themselves. And as long as they know that the password for the console port is let me in, they could then progress from user exec mode into privilege exec mode, which is where we're at right here. So we want to put a password on privilege exec mode access. And so in order to do this, we would go from user exec, which we have, to privilege exec using the enable command. Then we would go into global configuration mode with configure terminal or conf t. And you'll notice if you get enough of the command typed out and hit the tab key, oops, sorry. Let me exit out here. If you get enough of the command typed out and hit the tab key, it will complete it for you. That's how I'm completing the commands like that. I'm typing in conf tab and it'll put configure, and then ter, ter, as long as it's different from anything else that would be at this level, it would then complete the command for you and configure terminal. And so one other quick note here before we go back into global config, you'll notice that I'm in privilege exec mode. They have you type exit sometimes. If you type exit, that's going to completely log you off. It doesn't take you back to user exec mode. So how did we get into privilege exec mode? We typed enable. Well, to go from privilege exec mode back to user exec mode, you would type disable. And that moves me into user exec, but does not log me off the switch, off my session on the console line. So enable to get into privilege exec, disable to go back to user exec. Again, a little tangent there, but that's very valuable. It's going to save you a lot of time from logging yourself out and then having to log back in. So let's get back into privilege exec mode here with the enable command. Let's get into global config with configure terminal, because it's here that we're going to simply set the enable password to some value, right? Now, if you use 7, that means you're going to be providing and we'll say encrypted password. You're going to be providing the password in its encrypted form, which we're not. We're simply going to be providing the password in plain text. And that's what that line means here, the unencrypted password, the clear text. So we would say enable password, and they want C1 $C0. Now, this is decent. And if we say do, show, run, right? Remember that do command is going to save you a lot of time. You can see that the problem is that the password is in clear text in the switch running config. And remember, the running config, if I was to reload the switch right now, we haven't saved our configuration. And so everything that we've done right now is in volatile memory, not non-volatile random access memory. Everything we've done right now in terms of our changes would be lost if the switch were to be reloaded. But we'll get to saving the configuration here shortly. So we've done a decent job of protecting that enable password. However, the problem is that we can still see it in clear text in the running configuration. So they have us exit out of global config, which puts us back into privilege exec mode. And now we want to confirm that in order to get into global config with the configure terminal command, do we get a password prompt? And you'll notice that we don't see a password prompt. So it doesn't work when we're already in privilege exec. You'll notice that, right? So if I say exit and I'm already in privilege exec, and I go to transition to global config, it's not going to prompt me for the password. That's not where the password shows up. So again, here they want you to type exit and to exit all the way back out, right? It logs you off. We didn't use disable, we said exit. So now I have to say let me in to get logged into the console line. And now when I type in enable, which would put me in privilege exec mode, here's where we get prompted with the password, which is simply the C1S, and I think it's $sign actually. Let me take another look there. Yeah, C1 $sign, C0. So now we've protected the privilege exec mode, which again is a good start. But if someone was looking over your shoulder, they would still be able to see what the configuration looks like. And we say show run here. And again, shoulder surfer is going to see that, and they're going to see the console password. So still, we've done a decent job, but we need to make sure that this is a little more secure. So we're going to configure an encrypted password for what's referred to as the enable secret. And that's typically what you hear it referred to as the enable secret. And what that means is we're going to have an encrypted secret password that's not in clear text in the running config. So we're going to go from privilege exec with the configure terminal command to global config, where we would say enable secret. That's the keyword there, right? Remember before I said enable password? Well, we want to do enable secret. This would be considered a best practice because this password is not, so we'll say it's a secret. This password will not be seen when I say do show run. It will not be seen in clear text. You still see that, and so we'll probably remove that, but you don't see the new password. You can see it's this encrypted string of characters that if someone's looking over my shoulder, they're not going to have any idea what the password might be. So they want us to type exit. And before we do that, and actually we'll leave the other password on there. I don't want it to mess up with our completion percentage over on the bottom right-hand corner. So we'll just go ahead and say exit, and that puts us back out here at privilege exec mode. So the enable secret overrides the enable password. If both are configured on the switch, you must enter the enable secret password to enter privilege exec mode. Well, let's test that out. So I can simply say disable, right, and not log myself off, and then type enable to get back into privilege exec. So we'll type in C1 $C0. You'll notice that didn't work, but what about ITSASECRET? It's a secret, and that does work. And so you can see that that statement here, very important and very true. However, you would want to make sure that you clean up that enable password because maybe that password's being used for something else. Again, if the enable secret overrides enable password and you want enable secret in there, and that's the best practice, why would you leave enable password in there? You wouldn't. You would want to remove that. And again, I won't because I think it'll change the completion percentage, so we'll leave it in there. But let's come back up here to step number 7. And again, we're coming to the sort of the end here with switch number 1. And so they want us to say show run so that we can see, that the password for the secret password is now encrypted. So what's displayed for the enable secret? It's just an encrypted string, right? It's the cipher text, not the clear text. It's our cipher text. Why is the enable secret password displayed differently from what we configured? And it's because it's encrypted and it's hashed, right? So it's been hashed, and you'll hear it referred to as being encrypted. But technically, it's an MD5 hash that's being used to obfuscate and to hide what the real enable secret password is. All right, so you'll notice that this password is still in plain text, clear text. And then down here, the console line is also still in clear text. So we want to change that, right? So we're going to go back into global config with config T or configure terminal. And we're going to enter that command service password encryption. And this is a command that you should definitely become very familiar with and very comfortable with applying to your switch configurations right out of the gate, is the service password encryption. So they want us to go ahead and exit out. And it says if you configure more passwords on the switch, they'll be displayed in the configuration, or will they be displayed in the configuration as plain text or as a ciphertext, so to speak. So let's say show run, and you can see now it's displayed as this ciphertext. But here's the thing. This, a type 7, so you can see the enable secret is referred to as a type 5 password because of the 5. And this is referred to as a type 7 password because of the 7. And this is a Vignere cipher. And these are extremely weak. In fact, I will show you something right now, another value add here. You can simply copy this. Whoops, let me highlight that again. I can simply copy that string. I could come out to, let's say, Google and simply say, crack type 7 Cisco password. And here's a password cracker right here. And all I have to do is put in that value that we see there, click crack password, and that's how simple it is to crack those Vignere cipher the type 7 passwords. And you can see they even have a little note down here on the page. It says, don't use the old type 7 passwords anymore if you can avoid it. And so you might be wondering, and you'll see in other places where you go to configure things, there may be a type 7 password. So you might be asking yourself, why does Cisco allow you to do type 7 passwords? And again, Cisco's very clear. The type 7 password is not there to keep out the wiliest of hackers or the baddest of actors. The type 7 password is to protect against the shoulder surfer. And that's really what the type 7 password does, because someone might not be able to remember that string very well, but if they saw Cisco C1 $C0, that would be something that they might easily be able to remember. So again, would we leave this in the file? Chances are we wouldn't, because we're using an enable secret password. The service password encryption command doesn't encrypt our type 5. That was already encrypted for us. It takes care of the type 7, and where would we want that? Well, at the very bottom down here. For the console line, we want that to be obfuscated as well. Right? We want to make sure that someone can't shoulder surf and see that value and then use that value against us. So that's our service password encryption command. So now we're going to configure what's referred to as the message of the day. And if you work in any kind of an environment, this is something that you want to have on your device that you can then use later on, maybe in a legal proceeding. Again, I'm not an attorney. My son is, but I'm not an attorney. However, in all the environments I've ever been, including 3-letter agencies, as well as government agencies like where I work now for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, you have to have a message of the day. In fact, the security team will scan your devices, and if they don't see a message of the day that meets government requirements that clearly indicate that if you are not supposed to be on this system, that you need to log off immediately. And again, I'm not going to argue the legal ramifications or the legal value of, well, that message isn't going to stand up in court. Again, something that you need to have on here and be familiar with entering is banner motd, and we need to enter this exactly, or else we're not going to get our points. And it says this is a secure system, period. Authorized access only. Whoops. Only. Exclamation mark. and then we'll put our parentheses in there, and you can see we got 7 percentage points for that. So I'm going to type exit. So the question now is asking, when will the banner be displayed? Well, let's type in disable and go out to user exec mode. Do I see it when I type in the enable command? No, I don't. And let me in, I think, or it's a secret, I think is what it is. S-E-C-R-E-T. Yeah, it's a secret. So we don't see it here. Remember, this is warning someone trying to log in to the device, not someone already logged into the device. So if I'm already logged in, I'm not going to see it. But if I'm attempting to get logged in, that is where I'm going to see it. And so I'm on the console line. I hit enter to be prompted with the let me in password prompt here for console line access. And that is where I see the message of the day. Again, it's going to show up before the user is, it shows up when the user goes to log in initially, not when they're already logged into the device. So why should every switch have an motd banner? And again, this is where we get into sort of the legal realm, is that you want to make sure that if someone logged in and you didn't have that motd, let's say, telling people, hey, authorize access only, this is a secure system, theoretically, they could then be malicious, a bad actor, wipe your configuration out, make changes, do bad things, and there's a possibility you might not have legal recourse should you pursue, this in the courts, right? So that's why we want to have it on there. And another reason you might say is, well, maybe someone, goes to connect by mistake, and they telnet or SSH to this device by mistake. And then they see that message and they say, and this is our good actor, oh, yeah, I wasn't trying to go here. Maybe I was trying to go to, some other server somewhere, right? Trying to telnet onto a Linux box or an SSH onto a Linux box. And so they see this and they're like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. So let me go ahead and do something else. All right. So now we're going to do the final step. We're going to get into privilege exec mode with the enable command. And this is, it's a secret. And we're going to save the running configuration. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. And I'm going to make a statement here. Make sure that copy running config, startup config. So I want to copy the running config, which will be lost if I was to reload the switch right now. Again, the running config is a combination of the startup config and any changes I've made since I've been logged in and between saving it, right? So if no one ever saves the configuration, you can log in and log out and log in and log out and every time make tons of changes. But if nobody saves the configuration, the running configuration, to the startup configuration, and we reload the switch, everything is going to be gone. So by saying copy running config, which is in volatile memory, the running config, to the startup config, which is in non-volatile random access memory, NVRAM, that saves the configuration off. So now if I was to reload this switch, all the changes we've made would still be there. And you can see we're at 50% from our completion percentage because we've done one of the 2 switches we need to configure. So, but before we do that, let's go back and say dir NVRAM colon. And what if I was to say it without the colon? You can see we still see it, but put the colon on there because that's what it shows you. If you were to say dir question mark, it shows you the colon. So, but again, you can say dir NVRAM, and there is my startup config. And so if the switch was to be powered off and powered on or reloaded, the startup config is going to be the reflection of all the changes we've made up to the point where we said copy running config to startup config. Now, when you're learning how to do this and save your configuration, that is definitely the command that you want to learn. And you definitely want to understand that the running config is in volatile memory, but the startup config is a non-volatile, meaning it's not volatile. It's not going to be lost if we reload the switch. However, there's a shortcut. You can say write mem. And that is, think of it as an alias to saying copy running config startup config. That command does the exact same thing as when you say copy running configuration to the startup configuration. So you might be scratching your head and saying, well, why don't they just show us how to do that? Because maybe you want to copy the running configuration to flash, right, which is also not volatile and might be considered an external card, a compact flash card of some kind, inside the device. Maybe I want to save a backup copy, right, of a point-in-time copy. So what if I was to say CFG, and then that's, TP Bonfi, it's me that's saving it, and I'm saving it on the 16th of January, 2021. Oops, sorry. And it looks like they're not going to let us make that save. So here, let me show you here. Let's go out to a real Cisco switch, and let's connect into this 2960 right here. And wow, that is awfully small. So please indulge me for a second here while we change the font size to something that we can see. There we go. All right, so if I'm on this switch, maybe I want to say copy running config to flash : and just cfg.tpbonfi.01, today's date, 2021. And you can see here, and again, Packet Tracer is a very good tool, but it is not the full-blown iOS. And I say this a lot in a lot of videos I make, but I want it to be there as a reminder that on real Cisco devices, physical Cisco devices, you're going to see different behavior. And so here, this copy running config, what I've just done is I've saved a copy. If I type in dir, you can see that I have this backup copy right here, right? So maybe I want to save a copy of the config when I first log in, because maybe I come in here and I make some bad changes and then save those changes. And then I decide, you know what? Everything was working great on January 16th, 2021. I want that configuration back, right? And then so from here, you could say copy flash : and do it in the opposite direction, config.tpbonfi.that to running config. And so now I'm pulling back the backup copy. And it didn't like it because there's a bunch of stuff I've got in the config. So it didn't like it, but that's a way that you could pull it back. Now, there are other ways that we can pull it back, and let me show you another way, is you can say configure replace. And this is probably the preferred way to do it. I was trying to avoid this. But CFG TP-Bonfi. So if you say configure replace, right, and this is how you would want to do it, and I say yes, you're not going to see all the error messages. It just simply tells you, hey, I've rolled your configuration back to what that configuration had in it, right? And so again, I was trying to avoid showing you this right out of the gate because it is a little bit different, and that copy run config command is good. So you could use the copy running config command to save backup configurations to flash, which you can see by simply saying dir, right? If I say dir NVRAM : you can see there's my startup config, right? And there's some other things that we have in here, but the startup config is what we're interested in, right? And that's copy running config, startup config, or write mem for write memory. All right, well, let's step back over to the activity here. And we weren't able to do that here, and understandably so. Again, Packet Tracer not configured to do everything that we might want to do. In fact, let me just hit enter here a few times. All right, so now we're done. We've saved our config. Let's, in a quicker fashion, right, let's test ourselves by not scrolling back up and looking at the commands if we can't, and let's do the configuration here. So we'll go from user exec to privilege exec. Let's put our host name in here, and then we'll go from privilege exec to global config with configure terminal. We'll put our host name in here, switch 2. Remember, How do we stop it from interpreting maybe a typoed command from privilege exec mode and then trying to resolve that as a host name in DNS? It's no IP domain lookup, right? And again, we're not getting points for that, but that's a good command to have on here. Now, we want to protect access to the console using the let me in password. Well, for that, we would need to go into the console line and say password, let me in, and then log in, right, to force the prompting of that password. So configure an enable password of Cisco and an enable secret password of it's a secret. Again, they're having us do this so that we can see both ways to do it. Realistically, I don't believe that you would leave that enable password, which is that type 7, on the device. So we simply say enable password and C1 $, C0, and then enable secret, and we'll put in here it's a secret, right? And if I say do show run, you can see that it's still in plain text, but now it says configure an appropriate message to those logging into the switch. Well, we know that's that banner motd, and we'll copy the exact same thing from above. This is a secure system and authorized user or access, authorized access only. So we'll use that as our banner. Encrypt all plain text passwords. That's our service password encryption. So now the enable password and the password on the console line, those are also encrypted, but very weakly encrypted. How do we see? Do show run. So that way I don't have to exit out and then come back in. And you can see there's our type 7. And so if you were to grab this and copy that and go out to any of a million websites that are out there on the internet, there it is. So it's very easy to crack the type 7 password. So be aware of that. Now, ensure that the configuration is correct. I could say do show run, right? And we take a look and everything looks good. I don't think we've missed anything here, but we're missing 7 points. And maybe what those 7 points are is they're waiting for us to say copy running config to startup config. And that's not the 7 points. Let me make sure. Protect access to the console line, configure and enable password. We did that. An appropriate message to those logging into the switch. We did that. Encrypt it. We did that. Ensure the config is correct. What did we miss? They probably had us do something up here that I did not do. And we did use, oh, you know what it was? I think I used, did I use let me in for the password? Let me in. So that's correct. So what you could do is you can check results, but before we do that, before we bail out, let's just make sure here. Yeah, I entered in everything that I believe. We'll take one last look here and we'll say show run. And I'm wondering if, well, no, that wouldn't have done it. So we'll take a look here. So the host name is correct. Service password encryption is enabled. We've got our secret password. We've got our weaker password. We've got our no IP domain lookup. We didn't do anything with any of the ports on the switch. We saw how those are all configured. The banner message is there. The password on the console is there. And so that's it. So let's click on check results and see what it thinks we missed. And so again, you can see that we're all checks here, right? So everything has been done, and I thought we had done everything, but their packet tracer changed to 100%. So a great way to wrap this video up by seeing that sometimes, right, packet tracer is software, and with software, you might have some bugs, right? So again, be patient. What I was going to recommend is sometimes if you think your config is correct, right, but you don't get the points in packet tracer, I always recommend save your config and reload or reboot the device. And sometimes the device will come back and you'll get your 100 points. All right, well, that is a very nice and comprehensive introduction with a lot of little shortcuts and secrets thrown in there that is going to help you throughout the next 8 weeks in our Cisco Networking Academy Introduction to Networks version 7 course. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this has explained how to configure basic switch settings and armed you with some tools going forward that are going to help make this course a lot more enjoyable. All right, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.